This is the story of how one man channeled the strength of an entire company to take out enemy bunkers on the charge on the Siegfried Line. Born September 2nd, 1903 in Dublin, Georgia, Robert E. Brown's family was extremely poor, and as he got older, money became harder and harder to come by. Like many poor kids, Robert was really tough, and he enjoyed playing football and going to school. But because of his family's situation, he would eventually have to drop out of both of these and get a job to help make ends meet. Despite his best efforts, it just wasn't enough. Robert couldn't find a job that would pay him enough due to the fact that he only completed 7th grade. And in 1918, at the age of 15, he had to leave home because there was just too many mouths to feed. At this point in history, America had just wrapped up World War I, and between the 53,000 combat deaths as well as the over 63,000 deaths from injuries, accidents, and that year's influenza outbreak, the American military needed men. Badly. Robert saw this as an opportunity. With the war just ending, he figured he'd be pretty safe joining the military, and on top of that, he would know where he'd be sleeping that night, and for the first time in his life, he would know where his next meal was coming from. The only issue with this plan was that Robert was too young. But, like many of the most impactful men in military history, he just lied his ass off to get in. At the age of 15, Robert walked into the Army recruiter's office in Columbus, Georgia, and asked to join. You see, Robert was a big kid. He loved playing football, and he stood at just over 6 foot tall. So, when he told the recruiter he was 18 years old, the recruiter believed him. The recruiter knew he needed to replace around 116,000 men, and this big son of a gun walks in. He immediately signs the papers, and Robert signed his name as Bobbie E. Brown, and that's what he would be known as for the rest of his life. Joining the Army was actually a huge upgrade for Bobbie. Besides having a place to sleep and 3 square meals a day, he had enough time to pursue his hobbies as well. In his free time, Bobbie started boxing, which over the course of his career he scored 38 victories. He also started playing football again, and he got good at football. So good that in 1927 he joined the All-Army football team, and 3 separate colleges offered him full-ride scholarships. But once they found out he had only completed 7th grade, those quickly dried up. It was later said by General York that he had the educational equivalent of a 12-year-old, but Bobbie found out that just because he wasn't educated didn't mean he was incompetent. He qualified expert on every weapon system that he tested on, and over the 22 years of service that he had up until this point, he worked his way up the ranks to first sergeant. December 8, 1941, FDR officially declared war on Japan, and America entered World War II. After almost 23 years of service, Bobbie was the first sergeant in the headquarters company in Patton's 2nd Armored Division. Soon after the war began, Bobbie, as well as the rest of the division, was deployed to North Africa as part of Operation Torch. Operation Torch was an Allied invasion of northern Africa, with the aim being to secure the area as well as allow the Americans to begin their fight on the Nazis. The 2nd Armored Division made its way across northern Africa, fighting Rommel and his Africa Corps. During this operation, Bobbie would receive a battlefield promotion to 2nd Lieutenant and was immediately transferred to the 1st Infantry Division. This transfer would come just in time for the invasion of Normandy. Bobbie would lead a platoon of Company C up Omaha Beach on D-Day and continue the fight through France into Germany. Unfortunately, in their push across France, Bobbie's company commander was killed in a fight, and Bobbie, being next in line, assumed the position for the remainder of the battle. Lieutenant General York now had a decision to make. He needed to find a replacement for the Company C commander. York knew that Bobbie assumed command during the battle, but that didn't mean an automatic promotion. On one hand, Bobbie had very little formal education, and that was a very important attribute to have as a captain. On the other hand, York knew that Bobbie was a natural leader that earned the loyalty of his men, as well as a natural tactician and a fearless fighter. After the invasion on D-Day, the Allied forces began to push towards the German border and the Siegfried Line. The Siegfried Line was a German defensive line that ran pretty much the entirety of the German western border. Started in 1936, its purpose was to stop or at least slow down an Allied invasion of the country. After the failure of Operation Market Garden to bypass the line and secure a route into Germany, Eisenhower set his sights on Ruhr. This was a major industrial area that helped supply a lot of the equipment to the German army, and taking this would be a major step towards winning the war. The only problem with this is that Ruhr sat well behind the Siegfried Line in the town of Aachen. The Allied forces figured if they could capture the town of Aachen, they'd have a clear passage into the country. The plan was to have Allied troops surround the town before attacking, and then, hopefully, being able to convince the German troops inside to surrender. One of the areas south of town needed for staging would become known as Crucifix Hill. On the morning of October 8, 1944, Bobbie's promotion would become official when he received orders to begin the attack on Crucifix Hill. His company was responsible for 7 of the 43 known pillboxes on the hill. These would be 17, 18, 19, 20, 26, 29, and 30. At 1:15 p.m., after a squadron of P-47 Thunderbolts completed their airstrike on the hill, Bobbie led his men through a graveyard at the base of the hill to begin their attack. They only made it about 150 yards up the hill before they were caught in a crossfire between two different pillboxes. Fearing for the safety of his men, Bobbie ordered them to take shelter in an anti-tank ditch right in front of pillbox 18. Bobbie and his men were now pinned down, and they knew if something wasn't done quickly, they would all die. Not wanting to risk the lives of his men dealing with the pillboxes, Bobbie ordered satchel charges and pole charges, and ordered his men to cover him as he began his solo crawl to the nearest pillbox. Once making it to the first pillbox, somehow unharmed, he tossed in the charge, and seconds later the detonation neutralized the threat. With 1 of 7 down, he crawled back down to his men to resupply and headed out again. This time, however, he began to take mortar fire. Some of the mortar rounds landed close enough to slam him to the ground, but he kept going. Upon arriving at pillbox 19, Bobbie threw a pull charge inside, and after that detonation, followed it with a satchel charge, just to make sure. He made his way back down to his men, who had made some progress on their own, and as he was restocking, his sergeant noticed he was bleeding from his leg. Upon further inspection, they noticed that he had bullet holes in his canteen, and it was confirmed that he had been hit. Bobbie refused medical aid, as he just didn't have time for that, and as he reloaded, he set his sights on pillbox 20. This one was the most fortified of them all, with a fully rotating 88mm cannon, 6 machine gun ports, and 6-foot thick concrete walls. This one was not going to be as easy as the rest of them. He decided that he needed a better look at it before he made his move, so while sneaking through a communications trench from pillbox 19, he noticed a German soldier restocking the ammo to a reinforced door. In a moment of impulse, he jumped up, threw 2 satchel charges into the door, and dove back into the trench as the entire bunker erupted, killing all 45 German soldiers inside. With pillbox 20 down, the remainder of his company advanced quickly, cleaning up the remaining pillboxes on the hill. Bobbie soon realized that they had no idea what lay beyond the hill, and without this information, they could be open to a possible German counterattack. Once again, not wanting to risk the lives of his men, Bobbie headed out on a solo recon mission to find the enemy positions. He would go about this by purposely drawing enemy fire multiple times in order to locate their position. During this game of one-man whack-a-mole, Bobbie would be hit 2 more times by enemy fire, but he was able to make it back to the hill alive. The information Bobbie delivered would allow the Allied forces to fight off 2 German counterattacks in their attempt to retake the hill. Only after the hill had been completely secured did Bobbie allow the medic to begin treating his injuries. Even with all of these gunshot wounds, Bobbie stayed on the front lines to continue the fight into Aachen. While fighting in the streets of Aachen, an artillery shell landed close by Bobbie's position, but he wasn't as lucky as he was before. The shell blast blew out both of his eardrums as well as most of his teeth. He was able to make it to the aid station where he was shipped to Belgium and would be hospitalized for several months. But this didn't stop Bobbie. Once he was all healed up and back from his 30-day leave, he rejoined his company in Germany and fought the remainder of the war all the way through Germany to Czechoslovakia. After the war ended, Bobbie was flown home on August 23, 1945, and awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions at Crucifix Hill. As well as his Medal of Honor, Bobbie was awarded the Purple Heart with 7 oak leaf clusters, indicating the 8 separate times that he had been wounded in combat. The next 2 years of Bobbie's life would be mostly spent in the hospital, as doctors tried to repair the physical wounds that he received during the war. In 1952, Bobbie would retire from the Army after 30 years of service, but the PTSD that he got from the war would make life difficult as a civilian. He was unable to keep a job for any significant amount of time, and after a few years he became the janitorial foreman at the military academy at West Point. While he now had a steady job and was beginning to get used to life as a civilian, he was still in constant physical pain as well as mental. The PTSD Bobbie received from the war would constantly haunt him, and unfortunately, on November 8, 1971, at the age of 68, Bobbie E. Brown would take his own life in his house in New York. Soon after this, Bobbie would be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Bobbie's single-handed actions that day would play a major role into capturing the town of Aachen, creating a clear pathway into Germany, and beginning the end of the war. There are so many truly inspiring stories like this throughout the entire war, and I think it is really important to remember them before they get lost to time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.